I want to be clear about something before I get into this. I am not the type of person who scares easily. I never have been. Growing up, I was always the one in my friend group who wanted to take the shortcut through the dark park, who laughed at horror movies instead of covering my eyes, who volunteered to check out the strange noise in the basement, while everyone else stayed upstairs huddled together on the couch. Fear just never came naturally to me the way it seemed to for other people. I had just finished a 12-hour shift. It was a Tuesday, and the shift had started at 11 p.m. the previous night and ended at 11 a.m. that morning. Those overnight shifts are brutal in a way that is difficult to explain to people who have never worked them. It is not just the tiredness. It is the way your body never fully accepts that nighttime is supposed to be work time. Your internal clock fights you the entire shift. By hour 10, you are functioning on some kind of autopilot that gets the job done but leaves you feeling hollowed out afterward. I drove home in the kind of exhausted silence that only comes after a long night shift. The roads were quiet. It was a weekday morning, and most people were just starting their days while I was ending mine. I passed school buses and commuters and delivery trucks and felt entirely disconnected from all of them. Different schedules, different worlds almost. I got back to my apartment building at around 11:45 a.m. I live on the third floor of a 6-story building in a quiet residential neighborhood, about 20 minutes from the hospital. I have lived there for 3 years. It is not fancy, but it is clean and safe, and the neighbors are mostly quiet working professionals who keep to themselves. In 3 years, I had never had a single security concern. Never felt unsafe walking to my car at night. Never had any reason to worry about anything beyond the usual urban caution that becomes second nature when you live alone. I parked in the underground garage, took the elevator to the third floor, and let myself into my apartment. The first thing I did was exactly what I always do after a night shift. I changed out of my scrubs, took a quick shower to wash off the hospital smell that seems to cling to everything after a long shift, and then went to the kitchen to find something to eat. I had leftover pasta in the fridge from 2 nights before. Pen with a simple tomato sauce that I had made in a big batch specifically so I would have easy meals on hand during my run of night shifts. I heated it up in the microwave, poured myself a large glass of water, and took it to the couch. I turned on the television, but honestly I was barely watching it. Some midday news program was on, and I was staring at it without really processing anything being said. My brain was in that post-shift fog where conscious thought feels like wading through something thick. I ate my pasta and drank my water, and let the television noise wash over me without engaging with any of it. By the time I finished eating, it was around 12:15 p.m. I put my bowl in the sink, refilled my water glass, and went back to the couch, fully intending to fall asleep there. I do this a lot after night shifts. The bedroom feels too intentional somehow, too much like admitting that I am going to sleep while the rest of the world is awake and functioning. The couch is easier, more casual, less like surrendering to the upside-down schedule I keep for work. I pulled a blanket over myself, set an alarm on my phone for 6 p.m. so I would not sleep too long and ruin my sleep schedule entirely, and closed my eyes. I was almost asleep when my phone buzzed. I grabbed it automatically. After years of being on call and carrying a pager before that, reaching for a buzzing phone is a reflex so deeply ingrained that I do it without waking up properly. I squinted at the screen in the midday light coming through my blinds. Unknown number. Text message. Long shift tonight, huh? I stared at that message for a long moment. My half-asleep brain turned it over slowly. Long shift. The person said tonight even though it was afternoon. Did they mean last night? Were they talking about my shift that had just ended? My first thought was that it was someone from work. We had 3 new nurses who had started in the past month, and I had given my number to 2 of them in case they had questions during their orientation period. I had not saved their numbers in my phone yet. It was entirely plausible that one of them was texting me. I typed back, "Who is this?" Then I put my phone face down on the cushion beside me and closed my eyes again. Whoever it was, could wait. I was exhausted. No response came for about 10 minutes. I was drifting back toward sleep when the phone buzzed again. I picked it up. "You look tired." I sat up. The sleepiness evaporated instantly. Not because the message was explicitly threatening. It was not. But something about those 3 words sent a very clear signal to some primitive part of my brain that something was wrong. The kind of signal that bypasses rational thought entirely and goes straight to the part of you that is still an animal trying to survive. "You look tired." Present tense. Look. Not looked. Not you seemed tired when you left. Look. As in right now. As in they could see me. Right now. I stood up from the couch and went immediately to my window. I live on the 3rd floor, and my living room window faces the street. I looked down at the sidewalk below. A woman walking a dog. An older man checking his mailbox. 3 parked cars I recognized from the building. 1 car I did not recognize parked across the street. A dark-colored sedan. I could not tell from 3 floors up if anyone was inside it. I looked up and down the street as far as I could see from my angle. Nothing obviously wrong. Nobody standing and staring up at my building. Nobody with a phone pointed in my direction. I stepped back from the window. My blinds were closed. I had closed them when I got home because I always close them after night shifts to block out the daylight so I can sleep. They were the horizontal slatted kind, and they were fully closed. Not tilted. Fully closed. You could not see through them from outside. So how could anyone see that I looked tired? I told myself there was a rational explanation. Maybe it was a colleague who had seen me at the end of the shift and was texting me now. Maybe they meant I had looked tired when they saw me leaving the hospital. Maybe the use of present tense was just casual grammar and not literally meant. I typed back one more time. Seriously? Who is this? This is weird. No response. I stood in my living room for a few minutes, just listening to the apartment around me. Everything was quiet. The television was still on. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. A car passed on the street. Outside. Normal sounds. Nothing wrong. I checked my front door. Locked. Deadbolt and chain both engaged, just as I had left them when I came in. I checked my bathroom window. Closed and latched. My bedroom window. Closed and latched. Everything. Exactly as it should be. I went back to the couch, but I did not lie down again. I sat upright with my phone in my hand and the television on and waited to see if another message would come. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. The news program ended, and some daytime talk show came on. The woman with the dog passed my building again, going the other direction. The older man had gone back inside. The unrecognized sedan was still parked across the street. I started to relax slightly. Started to rebuild the rational explanation in my mind. Wrong number. Strange person. Nothing to actually worry about. Then at 1:03 p.m. my phone buzzed again. "You should really try to sleep. You have another shift in 2 days." I felt the blood drain from my face. Another shift in 2 days. That was not information that a random wrong number would have. That was not something a colleague would text without identifying themselves. My schedule was on the hospital's internal system. It was not public information. It was not something anyone could just know unless they had access to my work schedule specifically, or unless they knew me well enough that I had told them. I had not told anyone my upcoming schedule recently. I had no reason to. I called 911. I told the dispatcher what was happening. 3 texts from an unknown number. Specific references to my appearance, my schedule, my tiredness after a shift. I told her I believed someone might be watching my apartment. She stayed on the line with me while a patrol car was dispatched. She asked me to stay away from windows and to keep my door locked. I did both. While I was on the phone with her, another text came in. "Don't turn the lights on." My lights were off. I had not turned any lights on when I got home, because it was midday, and enough light came through the blinds. My lights had been off the entire time. Whoever was sending these messages knew my lights were off. I told the dispatcher about the new message. Her voice stayed professionally calm, but she told me the patrol car was close and asked me to stay on the line. 2 officers arrived 7 minutes later. I let them in and showed them the messages. They went through the apartment first, checking every room and the closets, before going back outside to check the building perimeter and the street. They found the dark sedan still parked across the street. It was empty by the time they reached it. They ran the plates and told me it was registered to an address in a suburb about 30 minutes away. No record attached to the registration, just a name and an address. They took a full report and 1 officer waited outside my building for another 40 minutes before leaving. The text stopped after the police arrived. I never received another message from that number. When police followed up with the address attached to the sedan registration, they found the car, but the resident denied any involvement and there was not enough evidence to pursue charges. I moved apartments 4 months later. It started on a Thursday in early November. I remember the day specifically because we had just finished parent-teacher conferences the night before, which run late and leave me completely drained. So by Thursday afternoon, I was already tired and somewhat distracted and not particularly alert to anything unusual happening around me. I stayed after school to finish grading a set of essays that I had been putting off, and by the time I packed up my bag and headed for the parking lot, it was close to 6 p.m. Most of the other teachers had already left. The parking lot was mostly empty. I was unlocking my car when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. Unknown number. No contact name. Just a string of digits I did not recognize. The text said, "Leaving soon?" I stood there next to my car in the nearly empty parking lot and read that message twice. My immediate reaction was mild confusion rather than alarm. I genuinely thought at first that it might be my wife texting from her office phone. She works as an accountant, and sometimes her personal phone dies during the day and she texts me from the office landline or from a colleague's phone. It would not have been the first time an unknown number turned out to be her. I typed back, "Is this you? Which phone are you on?" The response came within about 30 seconds. "No." Just that one word. No punctuation, no explanation. No follow-up. I stood there reading that single word for a moment. Then I looked up from my phone and looked around the parking lot. 4 other cars still there belonging to staff who stayed late for various reasons. The custodial staff's truck near the side entrance. The road beyond the parking lot fence with the usual late afternoon traffic moving past. Nothing wrong that I could see. Nobody watching me that I could identify. I got in my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute. I typed back asking who it was and what they wanted. No response came. I waited another couple of minutes and then drove out of the parking lot and started my commute home. I told myself it was a wrong number situation. Someone had sent a message to the wrong person and then realized their mistake and stopped responding. It happened all the time. I had done it myself. It was nothing. I was maybe 5 minutes into the drive, stopped at a red light on Morrison Avenue when my phone buzzed again. I glanced at it in the cup holder. Same unknown number. Blue Honda, right? Nice. The light turned green. I did not move for a second. The car behind me honked and I pulled through the intersection automatically while my brain tried to process what I had just read. Blue Honda. I drive a blue Honda Civic, 4 years old. Nothing distinctive about it except the color. But this person knew it was blue, and they knew it was a Honda. I looked in my rearview mirror. 4 or 5 cars behind me. Nothing that seemed obviously out of place. A white pickup, a silver SUV, a black car I could not identify at that distance. None of them seemed to be following me specifically, but I was not exactly calm enough to make a reliable assessment. I drove the rest of the way home faster than usual, checked my mirrors constantly. Took one unplanned turn onto a side street just to see if anyone followed me and watched the cars behind me long enough to feel reasonably sure nobody had turned with me. Then I got back on my usual route and made it home without seeing anything obviously concerning. I pulled into my driveway and my phone buzzed again. Made good time tonight. I sat in my parked car with the engine running and read that message 3 times. Made good time tonight. They knew I had arrived. They knew it had been a fast drive. Were they watching my driveway? Were they somewhere on my street right now watching me sit in my car? I looked up and down my street through the windshield. My neighbor from 2 houses down was out walking his dog the way he did every evening around this time. A couple walking together on the opposite sidewalk. A teenager on a bike. Everything looked exactly the way it always looked on a Thursday evening in my neighborhood. I went inside quickly, without standing around outside longer than necessary. I told my wife everything the moment I walked in. Showed her the messages. She read them carefully, and then looked up at me with an expression that was concerned but not alarmed. Her instinct was the same one I had been fighting since the parking lot. It was probably a student. Middle school kids did things like this sometimes. Got hold of a teacher's number somehow and thought it was funny to be creepy about it. They would not have known I was leaving school unless they were near the school at that time. They would not have known my car unless they had seen me in it. It made sense. It was a reasonable explanation. I almost fully accepted it that night, but the text did not stop. The next day was Friday. I was at school by 7:30 a.m. and went through my day normally. Last period ended at 3 p.m. and I stayed an extra hour for a student meeting. When I walked out to my car at 4:15 p.m., my phone buzzed before I even reached the vehicle. Early today, I stopped walking, looked around the parking lot. More cars than the night before, since it was earlier. Other teachers still leaving. A few students lingering near the front entrance, waiting for rides. Nothing I could point to as wrong, but early today. They thought I usually left later. They knew my typical schedule well enough to notice when I left earlier than usual. This was not a random wrong number. This was not a confused stranger who had accidentally texted me once and then kept going out of awkwardness. This was someone who knew my school, who knew what time I usually left, who was apparently watching or nearby frequently enough to notice variations in my schedule. The rational student explanation started to feel a lot less comfortable. Over the following week, the text continued. Always during my commute. Always specific. Never directly threatening, but always demonstrating knowledge they should not have had. One afternoon, they mentioned the gas station on Morrison Avenue where I had stopped to fill up. Another time, they referenced a detour I had taken because of road work on my usual route. A third message mentioned that I had stayed particularly late that day, which I had because of a staff meeting that ran long. Each message on its own might have had some innocent explanation. Together, they formed a picture that I could not find any innocent explanation for. Someone was following me regularly, watching my movements, documenting my habits, and texting me specifically to let me know they were doing it. That last part was what kept me awake at night. They wanted me to know. They were not just watching quietly. They were communicating, reaching out, making sure I understood that I was being observed. What does a person want when they do that? What is the point of letting someone know they are being watched, unless you want them to feel afraid? I went to the police on the 5th day. I printed out screenshots of every message and brought them in. The officer who took my report was professional and thorough, but honest with me about the limitations of what they could do. Without a direct threat in the messages, it was difficult to classify as criminal harassment under the specific statutes. They could note the report, they could flag my address, they could advise me on safety measures, but actively investigating an unknown number without more to go on was not something they could immediately prioritize. I understood. I did not like it, but I understood. I started varying my route home every day. Different roads, different timing, sometimes stopping somewhere unexpected just to see if the texts would reference it. They always did. One afternoon, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot I had never stopped at before and sat there for 10 minutes before driving home. That evening, I got a text saying simply, "New store?" They were following me in a vehicle. There was no other explanation. They were physically behind me on the road, and I was not spotting them because I did not know what to look for. I bought a cheap dash cam and set it up facing the rear window on day 8. I did not tell my wife I was doing it because I did not want to frighten her more than she already was. I positioned it to capture as much of the road behind me as possible and started recording my commutes. The first 2 days of footage showed nothing obviously useful. Lots of cars. Nothing that followed me for more than a few turns. On day 3, I reviewed the footage more carefully, and toward the end of my commute, about 3 blocks from my house, I noticed a black pickup truck. It had pulled out behind me from a side street, about half a mile from home. It followed me for 2 blocks. When I turned onto my street, it did not follow. It continued straight. By itself, that meant nothing. But I went back through the previous day's footage and found the same truck. Different starting point each time, but always appearing in the last few minutes of my commute. Always peeling off before my actual street. I took the footage to the police and gave them the license plate number I had captured. They ran it. The plates came back registered to a man in a neighboring county. He had one prior on his record, a harassment charge from 3 years earlier that had resulted in a restraining order for a woman in a different city. Officers went to speak with him that same afternoon. The text stopped before I even got home from the police station that day. I do not know exactly what was said to him. The officer who followed up with me was limited in what they could share. But whatever happened in that conversation ended the texts immediately and permanently. I still drive different routes home sometimes. Not always. Not out of active fear anymore. More out of habit that formed during those 2 weeks and never fully went away. My wife and I moved to a house in a different neighborhood 8 months later, partly for reasons that had nothing to do with this. More space, better school district for when we have kids, normal life reasons. But I would be lying if I said the incident played no part in wanting a fresh start somewhere new. I still think about those texts sometimes, specifically the first one in the school parking lot. Leaving soon? How long had he been watching before he sent that first message? How many days or weeks had he been following my commute before he decided to make contact? How much did he know about me that he never put in a text message? Those are questions I will never have answers to. And honestly, I am not sure I want them. This was my freshman year of college. I had started in September at a university about 3 hours from my hometown. It was my first time living away from home for an extended period, and I had gone through the standard adjustment period that most freshmen go through. Homesickness in the first couple of weeks. Then the gradual building of a new routine, new friends, new habits. The slow process of a new place starting to feel like somewhere you belong. By November, I felt settled, comfortable. The dormitory felt like home in the way that spaces start to feel like home when you have lived in them long enough. I knew which elevator was faster. I knew which shower on my floor had the best water pressure. I knew my neighbors well enough to wave in the hallway and well enough to know whose music I was hearing through the wall on weekend nights. My room was 412, 4th floor, east wing, facing the interior courtyard. I had a roommate named Kara, who was from the same state as me. Coincidentally, though we had not known each other before college. We got along well, similar sleep schedules, similar levels of tidiness, compatible enough that the small space never felt tense or uncomfortable. The weekend this happened, Kara had gone home to visit her family. She left Friday afternoon and was coming back Sunday evening. So from Friday night through Sunday, I had the room entirely to myself, which honestly felt like a luxury after 2 months of sharing a relatively small space with another person. I had bought snacks. I had a list of things I wanted to watch. I was genuinely looking forward to 2 nights of complete solitude. Friday passed without incident. I studied for a few hours, video called my parents, ate dinner with some people from my floor, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. Completely normal. Saturday was also mostly normal. I slept late, which felt amazing. Spent the afternoon doing laundry and working on a paper that was due the following week, and ordered food delivery for dinner. By 10 p.m., I was in bed with my laptop watching something I had been meaning to watch for weeks. Completely relaxed, completely comfortable, completely alone in the way that felt good, rather than frightening. Around 11 p.m., I put the laptop aside and picked up my phone, just scrolling. The completely mindless kind of phone use that happens at the end of a day when your brain is winding down and you want something that requires zero effort. I was barely reading anything, just moving my thumb and letting images and words blur past. My phone buzzed with a text notification. Unknown number. No name. Just digits. The message said, "Quiet night?" I read it once and felt nothing in particular. Unknown numbers texting me out of nowhere was not something that had happened to me before, but it also did not immediately seem alarming. My first thought was that it was someone from my floor whose number I had not saved. We had done a floor-wide number exchange in the first week of the semester, and I had not been diligent about saving all of them. I typed back, "Who is this? Don't think I have your number saved." Then I put my phone on my chest and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The room was quiet. The building was not particularly loud that night. I could hear faint music from somewhere down the hall, but it was not intrusive. The kind of ambient dormitory noise that you stop noticing after a while. My phone buzzed. Someone who can see your light on. I looked up at my ceiling light. It was on. I always kept the overhead light on until I was actually ready to sleep, at which point I would switch to the smaller lamp on my desk, which was less harsh. The overhead light was on. I sat up in bed and looked at my window. My room faced the interior courtyard. The courtyard was a roughly rectangular open space, surrounded on all 4 sides by the dormitory building. It had benches, some trees, a few planters with flowers that had long since died off for the winter, and a single lamppost in the center that stayed on all night. It was a decent-sized space, but not enormous. From my 4th floor window, I could see the entire courtyard and the windows of the rooms on the opposite side of the building. I got up and went to the window. Looked down. 2 students sitting on one of the benches. A couple, from the looks of it, sitting close together and talking. Nobody else in the courtyard. Nobody standing and looking up. Nobody holding a phone pointed at my window. I looked at the windows across the courtyard. Most were dark. A few had lights on. In one, I could see the glow of a television. In another, a figure moving around that I could not identify at that distance. Nothing that seemed like someone watching me specifically. I went back to my bed and picked up my phone. "Okay, weird. What do you want?" The response came fast. Faster than felt comfortable. "Just saying hi. Room 412, right?" I stopped breathing for a second. Room 412. I had not mentioned my room number. I had not said anything in this conversation beyond asking who they were and what they wanted. There was no way to get my room number from anything I had typed, which meant they already knew it. I stood up from my bed completely. Just stood in the middle of my room holding my phone and trying to think clearly through the sudden rushing noise that had started in my head. The kind of mental static that kicks in when your body recognizes a threat before your brain has fully processed it. How did they know my room number? I typed it. Sent it. "How do you know my room number?" The response took longer this time. Long enough that I walked to my window again and looked down at the courtyard. The couple on the bench was still there. The courtyard was still empty otherwise. Then my phone buzzed. "Your name is on the door." I turned around and looked at my door as if I could see through it. Every dorm room on my floor had a small card holder next to the door with a name card inside. It was a building thing, a way for people to find specific rooms, and for the resident advisors to keep track of who lived where. My card said my first name in the university's standard printed font. Just my first name. So they had been on my floor. They had been in my building, on the 4th floor, in the East Wing, standing outside room 412, and reading my name card. And then they had texted me on my personal cell phone. My personal cell phone number was not on that name card. My name was on that card. Just my first name. Nothing else. I had absolutely no idea how anyone could have connected my first name on a dormitory door to my personal cell phone number. It was not publicly listed anywhere that I was aware of. It was not on any university directory. I had not given it to anyone in the building recently except through that floor-wide exchange in September, which had been a group chat situation, not a direct sharing of numbers. I called campus security immediately. Did not text back again. Just called. 2 security officers arrived within 5 minutes. I showed them the messages. They searched the floor, checked the stairwells, looked through the corridor. They found nothing unusual, and nobody who seemed out of place. At that time of night on a Saturday, the floor had plenty of people around, and whoever had been there, if they had been there recently, had had time to blend back in or leave. The officers waited while I called the unknown number from my room phone. It rang several times and went to a generic voicemail with no recorded name. They took down the number and told me they would pass it to campus police for follow-up. The text stopped after that call. I never received another message from that number. Campus police followed up with me 3 days later. They had traced the number to a prepaid phone purchased with cash from a convenience store in the city. Untraceable beyond that. No leads. No suspects. The investigation went nowhere. I finished the semester and did not return to that dormitory the following year. I moved into an off-campus apartment with 3 other students, partly for the normal reasons that students move off-campus after freshman year. More space, more independence, lower cost when split 4 ways. But also partly because every time I came back to that building after that Saturday night, I thought about whoever had stood outside my door and read my name card and somehow connected it to my phone number. Every time I walked down that 4th floor corridor, I thought about them standing right there in that same hallway,